The remote ranger station sat like a fortress against the Montana wilderness, where Sarah Chen had built the perfect life with her husband Jake. 3 months married, she'd learned to guard their sanctuary fiercely against the endless stream of admirers drawn to Jake's rugged charm and family wealth. So when the weathered pickup truck pulled up that October morning, and an older woman in designer clothes stepped out with a knowing smile, Sarah's protective instincts flared white-hot. "He's not interested in whatever you're selling," Sarah declared from the porch, her voice cutting through the mountain air like ice. "My husband doesn't need any more complications in his life." The woman's face crumpled as if she'd been slapped, tears welling in eyes that Sarah suddenly recognized, the same deep green as Jake's. Behind her, she heard Jake's sharp intake of breath, followed by a whispered word that shattered her world. "Mom." 20 years of estrangement, a family fortune built on secrets, and now, one devastating mistake that could cost Sarah everything she'd fought to protect. But what had driven a mother and son apart for 2 decades, and could the truth Sarah was about to uncover be worse than the lies she'd been living? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence stretched between the three of them like a taut wire ready to snap. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she watched the woman, Jake's mother, struggle to compose herself. The designer clothes Sarah had dismissed as manipulation now seemed heartbreakingly out of place against the rustic backdrop, as if she'd dressed carefully for this reunion, only to have it go catastrophically wrong. "Jake," the woman's voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with 2 decades of suppressed emotion. "You look just like your father." Sarah turned to see her husband frozen in the doorway, his knuckles white where they gripped the frame. The easy confidence that had first attracted her to him at the environmental law conference in Seattle had vanished, replaced by something raw and vulnerable she'd never seen before. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" His voice was flat, emotionless, but Sarah caught the slight tremor beneath the surface. "Eleanor." Sarah mentally kicked herself. In 3 months of marriage, Jake had mentioned his mother exactly twice, both times to say she was dead to him. She'd assumed drugs, abandonment, the usual tragic backstory that drove people to seek solitude in places like this. She'd never imagined a woman who looked like she belonged on the board of a charity gala. "I heard about your marriage." Eleanor's gaze flicked to Sarah, and there was no anger there, only a deep sadness that made Sarah's chest tight with guilt. "I wanted to congratulate you both, and to—" She paused, her voice catching, to see if maybe enough time had passed. 20 years isn't enough. Jake stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between his mother and Sarah in a gesture that somehow felt protective of both women. "Nothing's changed. Everything's changed." Eleanor pulled a manila envelope from her purse with shaking hands. "Your father's gone, Jake. The cancer took him last month." The envelope hit the porch boards like a gunshot in the stillness. Sarah watched her husband's face cycle through emotions too complex to name: grief, anger, relief, regret, all warring for dominance. She realized with a sick feeling that she knew almost nothing about the man she'd married. 3 months of passion and partnership in this isolated paradise, and she'd never bothered to dig beneath the surface of his carefully constructed solitude. "He never stopped looking for you," Eleanor continued, tears flowing freely now. "Every year on your birthday, every Christmas, he'd hire another investigator. When they finally tracked you to this ranger station, when we learned you'd gotten married," she gestured helplessly at Sarah. "I had to come. I had to try." Sarah stepped forward, her throat burning with shame. I'm sorry, I don't know your last name. I'm so sorry for what I said. I thought—" "You thought I was after his money." Eleanor's laugh was bitter but not unkind. "I suppose I can't blame you. The Whitmore family has attracted its share of gold diggers over the years." "Whitmore." Sarah's stomach dropped. She'd done environmental consulting for Whitmore Industries, had seen that name on corporate letterheads worth hundreds of millions. She'd married into one of the wealthiest families in the Pacific Northwest and had no idea. "I should go." Eleanor bent to retrieve the envelope, But Jake's hand shot out to stop her. Wait. The word seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. Dad's really gone? August 15th. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick. Eleanor straightened slowly, hope flickering in those familiar green eyes. He asked me to give you this, if I ever found you. The October wind picked up, sending golden aspen leaves swirling around the three of them like confetti at a funeral. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, understanding that whatever was in that envelope would change everything. The perfect life she'd fought so hard to protect was already cracking apart, and she hadn't even learned what secrets had built its foundation. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of their bedroom, casting everything in a golden haze that should have felt romantic. Instead, Maya found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous evening's encounter with an intensity that made her stomach churn. Beside her, David's breathing remained deep and even, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in her mind. She'd handled it perfectly, hadn't she? Protected what was theirs from some opportunistic woman who clearly saw David's success and wanted a piece of it. The way the stranger had looked at their home, taking inventory of every expensive detail, it had been so obvious. Maya had seen that calculating expression before, back when she'd worked at her father's law firm and witnessed countless divorce proceedings where predatory women circled wealthy men like vultures. David stirred beside her, his arm instinctively reaching across the mattress to pull her closer. Even in sleep, he sought her out, and the gesture should have filled her with warmth. Instead, guilt twisted through her chest like a knife. She hadn't told him about the visitor, had told herself it wasn't worth mentioning, that she'd handled the situation and there was no need to trouble him with it. But as dawn crept higher, that justification felt increasingly hollow. "Morning, beautiful," David murmured against her shoulder, his voice thick with sleep. His lips found the sensitive spot just below her ear, the same spot he'd discovered on their honeymoon 3 weeks ago. "What time is it?" "Early," she whispered, turning in his arms to study his face. In the soft light, he looked younger somehow, the stress lines around his eyes smoothed away by sleep. She traced the strong line of his jaw with her fingertip, marveling again at how this incredible man had chosen her. "David, if someone from your past showed up, you'd tell me, wouldn't you?" His eyes opened fully then, dark and suddenly alert. "What kind of question is that? Of course I would. Maya, what's wrong? You've been tense since I got home last night." The lie balanced on the tip of her tongue, ready to tumble out. Nothing's wrong, just wedding stress, just adjusting to married life. But something in his expression, open, trusting, completely vulnerable, made her hesitate. "Someone came by yesterday," she began carefully. "A woman. She seemed to know you, but she looked—" Maya searched for the right words. She looked like she was casing the place, like she was planning something. David sat up abruptly, the sheet pooling around his waist. His entire body had gone rigid. What did she look like? The sharpness in his voice sent alarm bells ringing through Maya's head. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd anticipated confusion, maybe mild irritation that someone had bothered his new wife. Not this sudden tension that made him look like he'd seen a ghost. Older woman, maybe 50s, graying hair, tired clothes. She kept staring at the house like she was memorizing it. Maya sat up too, studying his profile as he turned away from her. "David, who was she?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. His hands clenched and unclenched in the sheets, and she could practically see him wrestling with something internal. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What did you say to her?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. Not "who was she?" Not "I don't know anyone like that." "What did you say to her?" Which meant he knew exactly who she was talking about. Which meant Maya had made a terrible, terrible mistake. "I told her to leave," she said, her own voice growing smaller. "I told her we weren't interested in whatever she was selling and that she needed to get off our property before I called the police." David's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. He turned to look at her then, and the expression on his face made her blood run cold. Pain, raw and devastating. mixed with something that might have been betrayal. Oh, Maya. The way he said her name, like it hurt him, made her want to disappear entirely. What have you done? I was protecting us, she said desperately, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but his fingers remained limp in hers. I was protecting our marriage, our home. David, please, just tell me who she was. He was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, each word seemed to cost him something. Her name is Margaret Chen, he said quietly. And she's my mother. The world tilted sideways. Maya felt like she was falling even though she was sitting perfectly still on their bed, in their beautiful bedroom, in the house that no longer felt like the sanctuary she'd thought she was defending. Everything she'd said, every cruel word she'd hurled at that tired-looking woman came rushing back with crystal clarity. Your mother is dead, Maya whispered. You told me your mother was dead. The rain had turned into a steady downpour by the time Marcus pulled into the driveway, his headlights cutting through the darkness. He sat in the car for a moment, engine still running, watching the water cascade down his windshield. The emergency at the construction site had taken longer than expected, a collapsed scaffolding that thankfully hadn't injured anyone, but had required hours of paperwork and safety inspections. All he wanted now was to sink into the couch with Sarah, maybe order takeout, and forget about the day. He grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat and made a dash for the front door, keys jingling as he fumbled with the lock. Sarah? He called out, shaking the rain from his hair as he stepped inside. Sorry I'm so late. The whole site turned into a... He stopped mid-sentence. Something felt off. The house was too quiet, too still. Usually Sarah would have greeted him by now, appearing from the kitchen with that smile that still made his heart skip after 2 years together. Instead, he heard only the distant hum of the refrigerator and the rain pattering against the windows. Babe? He dropped his keys on the entry table and walked toward the living room. You okay? That's when he saw it. Sarah curled up on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the lamplight, and there was something in her expression that made his stomach clench with worry. Hey! His voice softened as he approached, the way it always did when he sensed her anxiety creeping in. What's wrong? Sarah looked up at him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Someone came by today. Marcus felt his brow furrow. Someone? Like who? An older woman. She said... Sarah's voice caught slightly. She said she was looking for you, that she needed to see you. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mind immediately went to the one person who would fit that description, the one person he'd spent years avoiding. But it couldn't be. She wouldn't just show up here. Not after all this time. What did she look like? The question came out sharper than he intended. Sarah flinched at his tone, and he immediately regretted it. She uncurled herself slightly, wrapping her arms around her middle. Blonde hair, kind of worn out looking, maybe in her 50s. She was... Sarah paused, and something flickered across her face. She was asking a lot of questions. About us, about the house. It felt strange, Marcus. Like she was sizing everything up. Marcus ran a hand through his damp hair, his mind racing. It had to be her. After 20 years of silence, his mother had finally tracked him down. But why now? Why show up at their house when Sarah was alone? Did she give you a name? No. Sarah's voice grew smaller. I asked, but she was evasive. She seemed, I don't know, desperate maybe, like she really needed something. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. The same rage that had consumed him as a teenager, watching his father drink himself into oblivion while his mother chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another. The anger that had driven him to leave home at 18 and never look back. What did you tell her? Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I told her you weren't home, that she should leave. She looked up at him with those wide, worried eyes. Marcus, who was she? You look like you've seen a ghost. He wanted to tell her everything. About Margaret Holloway, the woman who had given birth to him but had never really been a mother. about the years of instability, the broken promises, the way she'd chosen her own ambitions over her family time and time again, about how he'd built his entire adult life around the principle of never becoming the kind of person who would abandon the people they claimed to love. But the words stuck in his throat. He'd never told Sarah about his mother, had always deflected when the conversation turned to his family. It was easier to let her assume his parents were dead than to explain the complicated truth of why he'd cut them out of his life. "I'm not sure," he lied, hating himself for it. "Probably just some solicitor or something." Sarah studied his face, and he could see she didn't believe him. She knew him too well, could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back. "Marcus," her voice was gentle but firm. "Talk to me, please." He sat down beside her on the couch, taking her hands in his. They were cold, trembling slightly, and he realized how much the encounter had shaken her. Sarah had grown up in a stable, loving family. The idea of strangers showing up unannounced, asking probing questions, would be genuinely frightening to her. "It's nothing to worry about," he said, squeezing her hands. "I promise." But even as he said the words, Marcus knew they weren't true. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows as Sarah methodically cleaned the apartment, each movement sharp with determination. She had spent the night plotting her next move, and by dawn her plan was crystalline clear. If Marcus wouldn't protect what they'd built together, she would. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Jenny. "Coffee later? You sounded stressed yesterday." Sarah ignored it. She had more pressing matters than explaining her husband's mysterious visitor to well-meaning friends who wouldn't understand the delicate nature of protecting a fortune. The memory of the woman's haunted eyes tried to surface, but Sarah pushed it down. Desperation wore many masks, and she'd learned from her mother's countless warnings about people who targeted successful men. "They study you," her mother had said. "They learn your weaknesses, your history, everything that makes you vulnerable." Sarah pulled out her laptop and began researching security companies. If Marcus wouldn't install proper safeguards, she'd handle it herself. The building's concierge was clearly useless. Anyone could waltz up to their door claiming to know her husband. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she remembered the woman's voice breaking when she'd said Marcus's name. The raw emotion had seemed genuine, but Sarah had seen enough daytime television to know that the best con artists were often the most convincing performers. The elevator chimed in the hallway, and Sarah's pulse quickened. Marcus was returning from his early morning run, a habit she'd grown to love because it gave her quiet time to think. Today, she needed to approach this carefully. Last night's argument had revealed a protective instinct in her husband she hadn't expected. Marcus entered, sweat dampened and breathing hard, but his usual post-run glow was absent. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his jaw was set in the rigid line she'd come to recognize as barely controlled emotion. "Good run?" she asked, keeping her voice light. He grabbed a water bottle from the refrigerator without looking at her. "Fine." The single word landed like a stone between them. Sarah closed her laptop and studied her husband's profile. Something had shifted overnight, and she felt the first flutter of genuine unease. "Marcus, about yesterday, I don't want to talk about it." His voice was flat, empty in a way that made her stomach clench. "But we need to. That woman could come back, and if she's trying to—" Marcus turned then, and the look in his eyes stopped her mid-sentence. It wasn't anger she saw there, but something far more troubling, disappointment so profound it seemed to hollow him out from within. "Do you know what you did yesterday, Sarah?" The question was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made her take a step back. "I protected our home. I protected us." Marcus set down his water bottle with deliberate care. "You want to know who that woman was?" Sarah's mouth went dry. There was something in his tone, a careful control that suggested she was standing on the edge of a precipice she couldn't see. She was obviously someone trying to take advantage. "Her name is Helen." Each word was measured, precise. "Helen Thorne. She used to be Helen Caldwell before she married my father." The world tilted sideways. Sarah gripped the edge of the counter, her mind scrambling to process what he'd just said. "Your mother is dead." "No." Marcus's laugh was hollow, bitter. "My mother is very much alive. And yesterday, for the first time in 20 years, she came to see me." The blood drained from Sarah's face. "That's impossible. You told me she died when you were 12. I said she was gone when I was 12. You assumed the rest. 20 years. The number echoed in Sarah's head as fragments of yesterday's encounter reassembled themselves into a horrifying new pattern. The woman's desperate familiarity with Marcus's name, her knowledge of their address, the way she'd flinched when Sarah had accused her of wanting money, as if the words had been physical blows. Oh, God! The whisper escaped before Sarah could stop it. Marcus watched her realization dawn with eyes that had gone completely cold. "She came here because she's dying, Sarah. Cancer. She wanted to see me, to try to explain why she left, maybe to say goodbye. And you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "You sent her away thinking I hate her, that I never want to see her again." The kitchen seemed to spin around Sarah. She reached out instinctively, but Marcus stepped away from her touch. "Marcus, I didn't know. How could I have known? You never told me." "Because I couldn't." The words came out raw, torn from some deep place. "Because talking about her meant admitting that part of me never stopped hoping she'd come back." Sarah stared at her husband, this man she'd thought she knew completely, and realized she was looking at a stranger. The restaurant felt like neutral ground, though Maya's hands trembled as she smoothed her dress for the third time. She'd chosen the corner table deliberately, private enough for difficult conversations, public enough to prevent complete emotional meltdown. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was orchestrating a meeting between two people she'd unknowingly kept apart for months. David arrived first, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. He kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign after the past week of sleeping in separate beds and exchanging only necessary words. "She'll come?" Maya asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "She said she would." David's fingers drummed against the white tablecloth. "Maya, I need you to understand. My mother isn't what you think. What happened between us, it's complicated." Before Maya could respond, she spotted Eleanor threading through the dining room. In daylight, dressed in a simple navy blouse and slacks, she looked nothing like the threatening figure Maya had conjured in her imagination. She looked tired, older, and when their eyes met, Maya saw something that made her stomach clench with fresh guilt, fear. Eleanor's hesitation was visible from across the room. For a moment, Maya thought she might turn and leave. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and approached their table with careful dignity. "Eleanor." David stood, and Maya caught the muscle working in his jaw. "Thank you for coming." "David." Eleanor's voice was steady, but Maya noticed her hands shake slightly as she placed them on the back of the chair. "Maya." The silence stretched taut between them until Maya couldn't bear it anymore. "Please, sit down. We need to talk." Eleanor settled into her chair with the careful movements of someone expecting an attack. Maya realized with dawning horror that this woman was afraid of her, afraid of what she might say, what accusations she might level. "I owe you an apology," Maya began, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. "What I said to you that day, how I treated you, there's no excuse for it." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You were protecting what you thought was yours. I understand that impulse." The gentle response somehow made Maya feel worse. She'd expected anger, defensiveness, something that would justify her own behavior. Instead, Eleanor's quiet grace highlighted exactly how badly Maya had failed. David cleared his throat. "Maya didn't know about you. I never told her I had a mother." The admission hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor flinched as if she'd been slapped, and Maya felt a surge of protective anger toward this woman she'd so recently brutalized with words. "Why?" Eleanor asked, the single word carrying 20 years of weight. David's composure cracked. "Because you left. Because you chose him over me, over Dad, over everything we were supposed to be as a family. I never chose him over you." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but tears gathered in her eyes. "I chose survival, David. There's a difference." Maya looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. The careful way Eleanor held herself, the raw pain in David's voice, these weren't the dynamics of simple abandonment. "You left," David repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. "I left because your father told me you never wanted to see me again, because Richard convinced me that staying would only hurt you more." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I left because I was 22 years old, broken, and believed that maybe everyone was right. Maybe you would be better off without me." Maya watched her husband's face cycle through emotions, confusion, anger, something that might have been understanding. "Dad said you chose Richard, that you picked money over family." Eleanor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Richard had money, yes. But I didn't leave your father for Richard. I left your father because—" She stopped, glancing at Maya uncertainly. "Because?" David pressed. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "Because I couldn't take another night of walking on eggshells, of wondering if some small mistake would set him off. Because I was tired of covering bruises with makeup and making excuses for why I couldn't lift my arm properly." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to spread beyond their small table. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. David went completely still. "You never said," David started. "You were 16. How could I destroy your image of your father? How could I make you choose sides in something you were too young to understand?" Maya reached across the table instinctively, covering Eleanor's trembling hand with her own. The gesture surprised them both, but Maya didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, meaning it for everything. The cruelty at the hospital, the years of separation, the pain that had been allowed to fester in silence. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked up, tears were flowing freely. "I never stopped loving him. I never stopped wanting to come home." The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched the spare keycard Michael had given her months ago, back when their biggest concern was whether she preferred morning or evening workouts in his home gym. Now she was using it to orchestrate what might be the end of everything. She'd spent the entire night crafting her plan. The private investigator she'd hired, the same one who'd helped her father catch his business partner embezzling, had been thorough, too thorough. The woman's real name was Margaret Sullivan, age 57, recently divorced from her second husband with a settlement that had apparently evaporated in bad investments. She'd been staying at increasingly cheaper hotels over the past month, each move tracked through credit card records. What Elena hadn't found was any connection to Michael. No shared friends on social media, no professional overlap, nothing that explained why this woman had appeared at their wedding or why she'd looked at Michael with such naked longing. The absence of obvious connections only convinced Elena that Margaret was more dangerous than she'd initially thought. Professional gold diggers knew how to cover their tracks. The penthouse was quiet when she entered. Michael had left early for a breakfast meeting with potential investors for his latest acquisition. Elena had feigned sleep, listening to the familiar sounds of his morning routine. The espresso machine, the rustle of his newspaper, the soft kiss he pressed to her temple before leaving. All of it felt like a goodbye. She'd dressed carefully for this confrontation. The Chanel suit he'd bought her for their honeymoon in Paris, the Cartier watch that had been his wedding gift to her, the engagement ring that caught light like a weapon. She wanted to look untouchable, worthy of protection, everything this Margaret woman was not. The call came at exactly 10 o'clock, as Elena had instructed. "Mrs. Chen Ross? This is Margaret Sullivan. I believe you wanted to speak with me." Even over the phone, the woman's voice carried that same wounded dignity Elena remembered from the wedding. It made her feel slightly nauseous, but she pushed forward. "Yes, I think we need to discuss your interest in my husband." A pause. "I'm not sure what you mean." The Ritz-Carlton lobby, 30 minutes. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. Come alone. She arrived first, choosing a table in the corner where she could see the entrance. The hotel's opulent lobby, all marble and crystal and old money, felt like the right setting for this. Elena ordered tea she wouldn't drink and waited. Margaret Sullivan entered looking smaller than Elena remembered. The designer dress from the wedding had been replaced by a simple navy blazer and slacks that had seen better days. Her hair was still perfectly styled, but there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She spotted Elena immediately and walked over with the careful posture of someone trying to maintain dignity while their world crumbled around them. Mrs. Chen Ross. Margaret's smile was polite but wary as she sat down. It's Elena. She studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of calculation, of predatory intent. Instead, she saw exhaustion and something that looked almost like grief. Would you like coffee? Tea? Coffee, please. Black. Elena signaled the waiter, buying herself time. Up close, Margaret looked even more worn down than she had at the wedding. Her hands, Elena noticed, bore the faint tan line of a wedding ring recently removed. I'll be direct, Elena said once the coffee arrived. I know who you are. I know about your divorce, your financial situation. What I don't know is what you want from my husband. Margaret's cup rattled slightly against the saucer as she set it down. What I want from your husband. You crashed our wedding. You've been asking questions about him around town. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is coincidence. For a long moment, Margaret just stared at her. Then something shifted in her expression, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like recognition. You don't know, Margaret said softly. He really didn't tell you. Elena's chest tightened. Tell me what? About me, about why I was at your wedding. Margaret's hands were shaking now. Oh, dear God, what has he done? What are you talking about? Elena's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from other patrons. Margaret looked at her with something that might have been pity. Elena, I'm not trying to steal your husband. I'm not some gold digger or scorned lover or whatever you think I am. Then, what are you? The words came out as barely a whisper, but they hit Elena like a physical blow. I'm his mother. The lobby seemed to tilt around her. The carefully constructed narrative she'd built about protecting her marriage, about defending what was hers, crumbled in an instant. Through the rushing sound in her ears, she heard Margaret continue speaking, but the words felt like they were coming from very far away. I've been trying to find the courage to contact him for months. The wedding was supposed to be my chance to see him, just to see him, but then Elena couldn't breathe. The silence in the car stretched between them like a chasm. Sarah stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets blur past as Marcus drove with mechanical precision. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, jaw set in a way she'd never seen before. The weight of what had transpired at the cafe pressed down on her chest like a stone. I can explain, she finally whispered, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Marcus didn't respond immediately. When he did speak, his voice was carefully controlled, devoid of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to. Explain what exactly? How you humiliated a woman you'd never met? How you made assumptions about someone based on what? Her appearance? Her clothes? Sarah's throat constricted. She'd replayed the scene dozens of times already, each iteration making her feel smaller. The woman's shocked face, the way she'd stammered out her name, the dawning horror in Marcus's eyes as he'd recognized his mother. I thought she was... What? What did you think she was? Marcus pulled into their driveway with more force than necessary, the car lurching slightly as he hit the brakes. Some kind of threat? To what? The question hung in the air as they sat in the sudden stillness. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the heat of shame creeping up her neck. How could she explain the panic that had seized her when she'd seen an unknown woman asking about Marcus? How could she articulate the possessiveness that had risen in her like a tide, swift and unreasoning? I was protecting us, she said weakly, knowing how pathetic it sounded. Marcus let out a bitter laugh, the first genuine emotion he'd shown since they'd left the cafe. Protecting us from my mother, from a woman who hasn't spoken to me in 20 years. He turned to face her fully, and Sarah was struck by the pain etched in his features. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, the rejection stinging more than any harsh word could have. "Marcus, please. I didn't know. You never told me about her, about what she looked like, about what? About the fact that she existed?" His voice cracked slightly. "I told you she was gone. I told you we weren't in contact." "But not why," Sarah said, desperation creeping into her voice. "You never told me why." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the windshield. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Because it hurts too much. Because every time I think about her, about what happened, it feels like being torn apart all over again." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. In all their months together through courtship and marriage, she'd never seen him this vulnerable. She'd always known there were locked rooms in Marcus's heart, places he didn't let her enter, but she'd assumed time would open those doors naturally. She'd never imagined forcing them open would cause such devastation. "She looked so sad," Sarah admitted quietly, when she left the cafe. "Broken, almost." Marcus closed his eyes, his breathing uneven. "She always looked sad. Even when I was a kid, there was this sadness in her that nothing could touch. Dad used to say it was like living with a ghost." The pieces of a puzzle Sarah hadn't even known existed began to take shape. "Is that why you don't talk about your childhood much? Why there are no photos of her in your apartment?" "I put them away years ago. It was easier than looking at them every day and wondering why I wasn't enough." Marcus's voice was raw with old pain. "Why she chose to leave instead of staying and fighting for us." Sarah's heart broke a little more with each word. She'd spent months thinking she knew the man she'd married, building a life with someone whose deepest wounds she'd never even suspected. "What happened between you two?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "Not tonight, Sarah. I can't." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I need time to process this, to figure out what it means that she's here, that she was asking about me. Maybe she wants to reconcile," Sarah suggested tentatively. "Or maybe she needs something. Money, a place to stay, who knows?" The cynicism in his voice was like armor, protecting him from hope. "I learned a long time ago not to expect anything from Helena Morrison." The formal way he said his mother's name, like she was a stranger, made Sarah's chest ache. She could see the scared child he must have been, waiting for a mother who never came back, building walls to keep the disappointment at bay. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything. "I'm so sorry." Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment his armor slipped. "I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't erase the look on her face when you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "We should go inside." The silence in the apartment felt like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Elena sat curled on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Marcus had left that morning without a word, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. She'd replayed the scene at the hotel 1,000 times, each replay making her feel smaller. The way that woman, Marcus's mother, had looked at her with such pain and disappointment. The way Marcus had stood there, caught between two worlds he'd never properly introduced to each other. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Sophia, "Called in sick for you. Boss wasn't happy. You okay?" Elena stared at the message, unable to summon the energy to respond. How could she explain that she'd potentially destroyed her marriage in the span of 5 minutes? That she'd become the very thing she'd accused that woman of being, someone who caused pain for her own selfish reasons. The apartment felt different now, like a museum of happier times. Wedding photos on the mantel seemed to mock her with their frozen smiles. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the dinner Marcus had cooked 2 nights ago, back when their biggest concern was whether to splurge on the good wine. Around 3 o'clock, Elena finally forced herself to shower and change clothes. She needed to do something, anything, to feel less helpless. She found herself standing in front of Marcus's dresser, looking at the framed photo he kept there, a picture of him at maybe 16, arms around a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. His mother, the same woman Elena had verbally eviscerated. She picked up the frame with trembling hands. In the photo, Marcus looked so young, so happy. The woman beside him had her hand on his shoulder, and there was such obvious love between them. What had happened to break them apart? Why had Marcus never talked about her? Elena sank onto the bed, still holding the photo. She thought about her own mother, about the fierce protectiveness that could make a person do terrible things in the name of love. Had she and Marcus's mother been driven by the same desperate need to protect what mattered most? The front door opened, and Elena's heart leaped. But it was only the neighbor's door she heard, followed by muffled conversation in the hallway. Marcus still wasn't home. She wandered into the kitchen and noticed Marcus's laptop sitting open on the counter. The screen was dark, but when she touched the trackpad, it came to life. She shouldn't look, she knew that, but desperation overrode her better judgment. His email was open, and there, sent an hour ago, was a message that made her stomach plummet. "Mom, I'm sorry about what happened. Elena didn't know who you were. I know that doesn't excuse it, but we need to talk, all of us. Can we meet somewhere? Please don't disappear again." The response had come just 20 minutes later. "Marcus, I think it's best if I go back to Portland. Some wounds are too deep to heal. I'm sorry I came. Take care of yourself." Elena's hands shook as she read the exchange. Marcus had been trying to fix this, trying to bridge the gap she'd widened with her accusations and cruelty, and his mother was giving up, retreating to whatever safe distance she'd maintained for 20 years. She closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was worse than she'd imagined. There was history here, deep and complicated, and she'd stumbled into it like a bull in a china shop. The front door opened for real this time, and Marcus's footsteps echoed in the entryway. Elena heard him pause, probably steeling himself for another confrontation. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, he looked exhausted. "She's leaving," he said without preamble, "flying back to Portland tomorrow morning. I saw your email," Elena admitted quietly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have looked, but you did." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Just like you shouldn't have said those things to her, but you did." The words hung between them like a blade. Elena wanted to defend herself, to explain about the fear and insecurity that had driven her actions, but she could see in his face that explanations wouldn't help. Not yet. "Tell me about her," Elena said instead. "Please, help me understand what I walked into." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was sincere or just looking for ammunition. After a long moment, he moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. "Her name is Catherine," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "And 20 years ago, she made a choice that broke our family apart." The silence in the car stretched between them like a chasm. David's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, while Sarah stared out the passenger window at the blur of streetlights, each one marking another moment of her marriage potentially slipping away. "She looked so broken," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. David's jaw tightened. "That's what 20 years of believing your son hates you will do." The accusation in his tone made Sarah flinch. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she'd only been trying to protect what they'd built together, but the words felt hollow now. The image of Eleanor's face, that moment when hope had crumbled into devastation, played on repeat in her mind. "Why didn't you tell me she'd been trying to reach out?" Sarah asked, finally turning to look at her husband's profile. "Because I deleted her messages before I even listened to them." His admission came out flat, matter of fact. "I've been doing it for years. Cards, letters, voicemails, all of it went straight into the trash." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "David, don't." He pulled into their driveway with more force than necessary, the car lurching to a stop. "Don't look at me like that. You don't understand what she did to our family." But as they sat in the darkness of their garage, Sarah realized she didn't understand. Not really. David had shared fragments over the years, his mother's drinking, the fighting, the way she'd abandoned them, but never the full picture. She'd accepted his version of events without question, built her defenses around his pain without ever considering that pain might have calcified into something harder and less forgiving. "Tell me," she said quietly. "Tell me everything." David's laugh was bitter. "Now you want to know? I've always wanted to know, but you shut down every time I asked about your family. I learned to stop asking." He turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. For a long moment the only sound was the tick of cooling metal. "She was different when I was little," he began, his voice distant. "Before the drinking got bad. She used to make these elaborate treasure hunts around the house, with clues written in different colored markers. She'd hide little prizes, usually just candy or small toys, but she made it feel like magic." Sarah had never heard this before. In all their conversations about his childhood, David had never mentioned a single positive memory of his mother. What changed? "Dad's business started failing when I was 8. He was never good with stress, and Mom, she handled it by drinking. At first it was just wine with dinner, then wine before dinner, then wine instead of dinner." His voice grew harder. "By the time I was 12, she was passing out on the couch most nights. Dad was working 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and I was basically raising myself." Sarah reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "The night she left, I'd made dinner, mac and cheese from a box because that's all I knew how to make." She stumbled into the kitchen, took one look at it, and started crying. Not the gentle kind of crying, the ugly, desperate kind that scared me. She kept saying she was sorry, that she was ruining everything, that we'd be better off without her. "David, you were just a child." I told her she was right. The words came out like shards of glass. I was angry and tired, and I told her we would be better off without her. She was gone the next morning. The confession hung between them, heavy with 2 decades of guilt and regret. Sarah finally understood the weight her husband had been carrying, not just abandonment, but the terrible belief that he'd caused it. "The woman I saw tonight," Sarah said carefully. "She wasn't drunk. She was nervous and sad and hopeful, but she wasn't the person you just described. People don't change that much, don't they?" Sarah turned in her seat to face him fully. "You're not the same person you were when we met 5 years ago. I'm not the same person I was this morning, before I destroyed everything." David's composure finally cracked. "I don't know how to forgive her, Sarah. I don't know how to forgive myself. And after what happened tonight, I don't know how to forgive you either." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah had been preparing herself for his anger, but the quiet devastation in his voice was somehow worse. "I know I can't undo what I did," she whispered, "but maybe we can try to understand why she came. Maybe we can try to understand each other." David closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the headrest. "I'm so tired of carrying this anger around, but I don't know how to put it down." "Then maybe," Sarah said, her heart breaking for both of them, "we figure it out together." The silence in the apartment stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Sarah sat curled in the corner of their sectional sofa, her knees drawn up to her chest, watching David pace the length of their living room for what felt like the 100th time. His footsteps had worn an invisible path in the hardwood, back and forth, each turn more agitated than the last. 3 days had passed since the disastrous encounter at the gallery. 3 days of stilted conversations, careful politeness, and the kind of crushing quiet that made every breath feel deliberate. David had called in sick to work, something Sarah had never seen him do, not even when he'd had food poisoning last spring. He'd spent hours staring at his phone, picking it up, setting it down, picking it up again. "You should call her," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. David stopped mid-stride, his back to her. "I don't know what I'd say. The truth. That I'm sorry. That we both are." He turned then, and Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of him. His hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. This wasn't the confident, composed man she'd married. This was someone broken, caught between two worlds he'd never learned how to reconcile. You don't understand, Sarah. It's not that simple with her. It's never been simple. Sarah unfolded herself from the couch, moving toward him carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. Then help me understand, please. I can't fix this if I don't know what I'm fixing. David's laugh was hollow, bitter. Fix it? Some things can't be fixed. Some things are just permanently broken. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Was he talking about his relationship with his mother, or about them? She searched his face for an answer, but found only exhaustion and something that looked dangerously close to resignation. "When I was 12, David said suddenly, sinking into the armchair across from her, "she forgot to pick me up from school." Not forgot exactly. She was at some gallery opening, networking, she called it later. I waited until the janitor found me at 8 o'clock that night, sitting on the front steps in the dark. Sarah's throat tightened, but she remained silent, sensing that any interruption might cause him to retreat back into himself. She came to get me with her hair perfect and her makeup fresh, smelling like wine and expensive perfume. And you know what she said? "Oh, David, I'm so sorry, darling. I lost track of time. You understand, don't you? This is all for us, for our future." His voice took on a bitter mimicry of refined tones. It was always for our future. Every missed dinner, every forgotten school play, every time she chose her career over being present, Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "David." "But that wasn't the worst part," he continued, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. "The worst part was that I did understand. Even at 12, I could see how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. I could see the exhaustion she tried to hide behind her perfect facade. So I learned to be understanding. I learned to be independent. I learned to not need her." The pieces of David's careful emotional architecture were finally becoming clear to Sarah. The way he never asked for help, never showed vulnerability, never seemed to need anyone for anything meaningful. She'd thought it was strength, but now she could see it for what it really was, a survival mechanism learned too young. "When I left for college," David said, "I think we both felt relieved. No more pretending to be a normal family. No more guilt on her part. No more disappointment on mine. It was easier to love each other from a distance." Sarah moved to perch on the arm of his chair, close enough to touch but not quite daring to. "But you do love each other. That's what makes it so hard." His voice cracked slightly. "If I hated her, if she were actually the selfish monster I sometimes painted her as, it would be simple. But she's not. She's brilliant and complicated, and she did the best she could with what she had, and I've spent 20 years being angry at her for not being someone she never knew how to be." Sarah finally reached out, covering his hand with hers. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "It's not too late, isn't it? Did you see her face when she realized what was happening?" "I've seen that look before, Sarah. It's the same look she had when my father left, like she was disappearing into herself, building walls so high that nothing could reach her." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then we tear them down. However long it takes, however hard it is, we tear them down." David looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in 3 days, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. The rain had stopped, but the silence in the kitchen felt heavier than the storm clouds that had just passed. Sarah stood frozen by the counter, her hand still gripping the edge as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Across from her, Margaret sat at the small breakfast table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. David had left 20 minutes ago, muttering something about needing air and space to think. The sound of his car pulling out of the driveway had echoed through the house like a gunshot, leaving the two women alone with the wreckage of the evening's revelations. "I should go," Margaret said quietly, breaking the oppressive silence. She started to rise from her chair, but Sarah's voice stopped her. "Wait." The word came out sharper than Sarah intended. She took a breath, softening her tone. "Please, don't go yet." Margaret settled back into her seat, studying Sarah with those dark eyes that were so painfully familiar now that Sarah knew where she'd seen them before, every day in the mirror of her husband's face. "I need to understand," Sarah continued, moving away from the counter to sit across from Margaret. 20 years. He hasn't spoken to you in 20 years and you just show up?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "You make it sound like I knocked on your door on a whim. Do you have any idea how many times I've started letters I never sent? How many times I've driven past his office building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man my little boy became? Then why now? Why today?" The older woman's composure cracked slightly. "Because I'm dying." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at Margaret, searching for signs of deception, but found only raw honesty in her expression. "Lung cancer," Margaret continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, if I'm lucky." She paused, taking a shaky sip of her cold tea. "I couldn't face the thought of leaving this world without trying to make things right with my son." Sarah felt the foundations of her anger shifting beneath her feet. "Does David know?" "He does now. I told him before you came downstairs." Margaret's eyes filled with unshed tears. "I watched his face change when I said it. For just a moment he looked like he was 8 years old again, scared and needing his mother. Then the walls went back up. The kitchen fell silent again, save for the steady drip of water from the eaves outside. Sarah struggled to process everything she'd learned in the past hour. Her perfect understanding of her husband's life had been revealed as incomplete, built on assumptions and half-truths. "What happened between you two?" Sarah asked. "David never talks about his childhood. I knew his father died when he was young, but he always said his mother was gone too." Margaret flinched as if she'd been struck. "I suppose to him I was. I made choices back then that I'll regret until my dying day." She set down her mug with trembling fingers. "After his father died, I fell apart, completely. The grief, the responsibility of raising a child alone, the financial pressure. I started drinking, too much and too often." Sarah's chest tightened as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. "David tried to take care of me," Margaret continued, her voice breaking. "A 10-year-old boy, trying to be the man of the house. He'd make me coffee in the mornings, help me to bed when I'd had too much wine. He'd lie to his teachers when I forgot parent conferences, make excuses to his friends when I embarrassed him. Tears were flowing freely now. The worst part was watching him stop being a child. He became so serious, so responsible. I was stealing his childhood one drink at a time." Sarah found herself leaning forward, drawn into the painful story despite herself. "The final straw came when he was 16. I showed up drunk to his high school graduation, made a scene, fell in the parking lot, had to be helped to the car by his principal." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "That night, David told me he was done, that he was 18 in 2 months, and when he left for college, he never wanted to see me again." "And you let him go?" "What choice did I have? I'd already destroyed everything good between us, so I let him walk away, thinking it was what he needed to heal." Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I got sober 6 months later, started going to meetings, got my life together, found work I cared about, but by then David had built a wall so high I couldn't find a way over it." Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of 2 decades of pain and regret that had just been laid bare between them. Outside, the clouds were beginning to part, allowing the first rays of afternoon sunlight to stream through the kitchen window. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of Elena's hotel room, casting everything in a soft, forgiving glow that felt at odds with the storm still raging in her chest. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying every moment from the previous evening: David's stricken face, Sarah's tears, the weight of 20 years crashing down around them all. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. She opened the door to find David standing in the hallway, looking as exhausted as she felt. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "Can we talk?" His voice was hoarse. She stepped aside, and he entered the small space that had become her refuge. They stood facing each other, the distance between them feeling like an ocean. "I don't know where to start," he said finally. "Try the beginning." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "Try the truth you should have told me months ago." David sank into the room's single chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I was 17 when she left. Dad had been drinking more, the fights were getting worse. One morning I woke up and she was just gone. No note, no goodbye, just her wedding ring on the kitchen table." Elena remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself. "And you never wondered why?" "Of course I wondered." His laugh was bitter. "I spent years wondering. But Dad made it clear that talking about her was forbidden. He told everyone she'd abandoned us, that she couldn't handle being a real mother and wife. After a while, it was easier to believe that than to keep hoping she'd come back. But she did come back." David's head snapped up. "What?" "She tried to see you, multiple times over the years. Your father intercepted her letters, turned her away when she came to the house. She never stopped trying to reach you, David." The color drained from his face. "How do you know that?" "Because I talked to her, really talked to her, after you stormed out." Elena moved to the window, unable to look at him as she continued. "She kept every letter she wrote to you, birthday cards she never got to send. She hired a private investigator to keep track of your life, because it was the only way she could know if you were okay." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of lost years and misunderstood intentions. "She left because your father hit her," Elena said quietly. "Not once, but repeatedly. The night before she left, he threatened to start hitting you too if she didn't learn her place. She left to protect you, David. She thought you'd be safer, without her there to provoke his anger." She heard the sharp intake of his breath, the creak of the chair as he shifted. "She was 19 when she married your father, 20 when you were born. She was barely more than a child herself, trapped in a marriage that was slowly destroying her. And when she finally found the courage to leave, she lost everything, including the son she was trying to save." Elena turned to face him then. David was staring at his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "I treated her like she was nothing," he whispered. "Last night, when she was standing there trying to explain, I looked at her the same way he used to, with that same cold dismissal." "Yes, you did." Elena's honesty was gentle but unflinching, and she still asked me to tell you that she loves you, that she's proud of the man you've become despite everything. David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I've been so angry for so long, I don't know how to let it go." "You don't have to let it go all at once, but you could try listening to her story instead of the version your father created. And us?" The question hung in the air between them, fragile and desperate. "What about us, Elena?" She studied his face, seeing not just her husband, but the 17-year-old boy who'd learned to protect himself by building walls so high that even love couldn't scale them. "I don't know," she said honestly. "You built our entire relationship on half-truths and omissions. You let me humiliate an innocent woman because you were too afraid to face your own past. I know I've messed up everything, but please—" "But," she continued, cutting him off, "I also understand now why you did it. It doesn't excuse it, but I understand it." David stood slowly, hope flickering in his expression. "Does that mean you'll come home?" Elena shook her head. "Not yet. We both need time to process this, and you need to decide what kind of man you want to be going forward, the kind who builds bridges or the kind who burns them." She moved toward the door, her hand on the handle. "Your mother is staying at the Marriott downtown, room 412. What you do with that information is up to you." As the door closed behind him, Elena pressed her back against it, wondering if she'd just saved her marriage or watched it walk away forever. The silence in the kitchen stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Elena stood frozen by the sink, her hands still gripping the edge of the counter, knuckles white against the marble. Through the window she could see Marcus pacing in the garden, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his hair in that gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell for anxiety. 20 minutes had passed since Catherine had left, and Elena couldn't shake the image of the older woman's face, the way her composure had cracked, revealing something raw and wounded underneath. The cruel words Elena had spoken echoed in her mind, each one landing with fresh impact now that she understood their true target. She's been hurt enough. Marcus's words cut deeper each time she replayed them. What had she done? The front door clicked open, and Marcus's footsteps approached the kitchen. Elena turned slowly, dreading what she'd see in his eyes. When he appeared in the doorway, his face was a mask of exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep. "How is she?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking older than his 32 years, devastated. "She's checked into the Marriott downtown." He paused, studying Elena's face. "She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for the confusion, for not introducing herself properly." Elena's stomach lurched. "She's apologizing? Marcus, I'm the one who—" "I know what you did." His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that made Elena step back. "What I don't understand is why. Even if you thought she was some random woman, Elena, the things you said—" He shook his head. "That wasn't you. At least, I didn't think it was." The accusation hung between them like a physical thing. Elena felt tears building behind her eyes, but she forced them back. She had no right to cry, not when she'd been the one to cause this pain. "I was protecting us," she whispered. "I thought she was after our money, our home. I've seen it happen before, Marcus. Women who target successful men who—" "Stop." Marcus held up a hand. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You've been my wife for 3 months, Elena. 3 months. My mother has been trying to find a way back into my life for 2 years. 2 years? Elena stared at him. You never told me she'd been reaching out. Because I wasn't ready. The words burst out of him with surprising force, because every time I thought about facing her, about dealing with all the shit from my childhood, I found another excuse to put it off. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I didn't need to worry about whether I was ready. You took that choice away from both of us. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Marcus, please, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. I can apologize, Can you give her back the last 20 years? Marcus's voice cracked. Can you undo the fact that she missed our wedding because I was too stubborn to invite her? Can you erase the look on her face when you told her she was pathetic and desperate? Each question was a blow, and Elena absorbed them all, knowing she deserved every one. No, she admitted. I can't undo any of that, but I can try to make it right. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where he'd been pacing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. She brought photo albums, Elena. Pictures from when I was a kid before everything fell apart. She's kept them all these years, hoping someday. He trailed off, his hand clenching and unclenching at his side. She wanted to show them to you. She was excited to meet the woman who'd made me happy. The tears Elena had been holding back finally spilled over. She moved toward Marcus, but he stepped away, the small rejection cutting deeper than any angry words could have. I need some air, he said, not meeting her eyes. I'm going to drive around for a while, try to clear my head. Marcus, wait. He was already walking away, his car keys jingling in his hand. Elena heard the front door close, then the sound of his engine starting up. She stood alone in their perfect kitchen, surrounded by all the beautiful things that had felt so important to protect just hours ago. Now they felt like props in someone else's life. Elena sank into one of the breakfast nook chairs, finally allowing herself to fully grasp what she'd done. She hadn't just hurt Catherine, she'd potentially destroyed Marcus's chance at reconciliation with his mother. She'd revealed a side of herself that was ugly and judgmental, driven by fears she hadn't even fully acknowledged. The question now wasn't whether she could fix this. The question was whether Marcus would still want her to try. The hospital waiting room felt like a purgatory of beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Maya sat rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands twisted together in her lap, watching David pace the same 5-foot stretch of linoleum for the 100th time. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the ICU doors, then at his phone, then back to his endless circuit. "The doctor said she's stable," Maya offered quietly, though the words felt hollow even to her. David stopped mid-step, his shoulders sagging. "Stable isn't the same as okay." His voice was hoarse from hours of silent anguish. "What if she doesn't wake up? What if the last thing she remembers is—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Maya heard it anyway. "What if the last thing she remembers is you calling her a worthless gold digger?" The weight of those words hung between them like a lead curtain. Maya had replayed the scene 1,000 times since they'd arrived at the hospital, each repetition making her stomach churn with fresh waves of shame. The look on Eleanor's face when Maya had accused her of being after David's money, the way the color had drained from her cheeks, how her hand had fluttered to her chest as if Maya had physically struck her. "I didn't know," Maya whispered, though she knew it wasn't enough. Would never be enough. "But you didn't ask." David's words were quiet but sharp as broken glass. "You saw an older woman being kind to me and immediately assumed the worst. You decided she was a threat without knowing a single thing about her." Maya flinched. "You never told me about her. In 2 years together, you never once mentioned your mother." "Because it was too painful." David whirled around, his composure finally cracking. "Because every time I thought about her, I remembered being 17 and watching my father destroy her life piece by piece. I remembered the bruises she tried to hide, the way she'd flinch when he raised his voice, how she'd sneak food into my room when he'd lock me in there for days as punishment." The raw pain in his voice made Maya's chest ache. She'd known David's childhood had been difficult, but he'd always spoken about it in vague terms, deflecting with humor or changing the subject entirely. "When she finally left him, she begged me to come with her," David continued, his voice breaking. "But I was so angry that she'd waited so long, angry that she was leaving me with him, angry that she couldn't protect either of us from the beginning. So I told her to go. I told her I was better off without her." Maya covered her mouth with her hand, tears blurring her vision. "She called every week for 3 years, every single week, Maya. Left voicemails telling me she loved me, that she had a safe place for me whenever I was ready, and I never called back, not once." David slumped into the chair across from her, burying his face in his hands. "When I finally worked up the courage to try, I'd waited too long. Her number was disconnected. It took me 2 years to track her down, and when I did—" "The accident," Maya said softly, remembering the story he'd told her about his father's death. "Car crash. He was drunk, of course, and suddenly I was alone, and the only person who'd ever really tried to save me was gone." David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, except she wasn't gone. She'd been looking for me too all those years, working with a private investigator, trying to find me after I moved out of that house. Maya felt like she was drowning in the enormity of her mistake. "The flowers at the coffee shop." She'd been leaving them for weeks, hoping I'd notice, too scared to approach me directly because she thought I still hated her. David's laugh was bitter and broken. 20 years, Maya, 20 years we lost because we were both too afraid and too proud to bridge the gap. And today, when we finally found each other again—" His voice trailed off. The ICU doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Dr. Chen emerged, pulling off a surgical cap. David was on his feet instantly, Maya close behind. "She's awake," Dr. Chen said, and Maya felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. "The cardiac episode was stress-induced, but there doesn't appear to be any permanent damage. However, I need to stress that she's still very fragile, both physically and emotionally. She needs rest and absolutely no additional stress." David nodded frantically. "Can I see her?" "Family only for now, and just for a few minutes." Maya watched David disappear through the doors, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of what she'd done. She'd nearly destroyed the most important relationship in her husband's life before it had a chance to heal. And now, as she sat in that sterile waiting room, she had to face the possibility that some damage couldn't be undone. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Sarah sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The house felt impossibly quiet without Marcus, who had left before dawn to drive his mother to the train station. Their goodbye had been awkward, stilted. 20 years of hurt couldn't be erased in a weekend, but something had shifted between them. She replayed their conversation from the night before, Margaret's words echoing in her mind. He's built walls so high, even he doesn't remember what he's protecting himself from. Sarah understood those walls intimately now. She'd spent the past day watching Marcus navigate the minefield of his childhood, seeing how carefully he measured each word, each gesture around his mother. The front door opened with a soft click, and Marcus appeared in the doorway. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, though his expression already told her everything. "She cried," he said simply, sinking into the chair across from her. "At the station. I haven't seen her cry since—" He rubbed his forehead. "Since the funeral." Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry. Are you?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended, and she saw him immediately regret it. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did, and you have every right to ask." Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I am sorry, Marcus. Sorry for how I treated her, sorry for the assumptions I made. But I'm not sorry she came." He looked up at her, surprised. "You needed this," she continued, "whether you wanted it or not. I could see it in your face when you were talking about your father, about what happened after he died. You've been carrying all of that alone for so long." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "She wants to try," he said finally, "to have some kind of relationship. She's moving back to the city, found a job at a clinic downtown. How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," he admitted with a bitter laugh. "I don't know how to do this, Sarah. I don't know how to let her back in without becoming that angry kid again." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe that angry kid deserves to have his say. I said terrible things to you about her, about why she left." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I convinced myself she was weak, selfish, that she abandoned us because she couldn't handle being a widow. What do you think now?" Marcus closed his eyes. "I think she was 26 years old when my father died. 26, with 2 young kids and no family support. I think she was drowning, and when that grief counselor offered her a way out, told her the boys might be better off with their uncle while she got treatment, she believed him." The pain in his voice made Sarah's chest ache. "She made the choice she thought was best for you. I know that now, but knowing it and feeling it are 2 different things." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "She said something yesterday that I can't stop thinking about. She said she spent 20 years wondering if I'd ever forgive her, and she realized she was asking the wrong question. What's the right question? Whether I could forgive myself for making it so hard for her to try." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This was the heart of it, the guilt that had been eating at him just as much as the anger. "Marcus, I was 8 when she left. But I was 18 when I refused to take her calls, 25 when I sent back her letters unopened, 30 when I didn't invite her to our wedding." His voice cracked. "She kept trying, Sarah. For years she kept trying and I kept pushing her away. You were protecting yourself. I was punishing her. And in the process, I punished myself too." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I robbed myself of having a mother because I was so determined to prove I didn't need one." Sarah joined him at the window, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "It's not too late, isn't it? How do you rebuild a relationship that's been broken for 20 years? "The same way you build any relationship," she said, resting her cheek against his back. "One conversation at a time, one choice at a time." He turned in her arms, and she saw something new in his expression. Not hope exactly, but the absence of the bitter resignation that had lived there for so long. "She gave me her new address," he said. "Asked if maybe we could have dinner sometime. Nothing big, just a start." "Just a start," he agreed. They stood there in the morning light, holding each other, both of them understanding that something fundamental had shifted in their small family. The walls were still there, but for the first time in 20 years, Marcus was ready to start taking them down. The silence in the car stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers against the evening drizzle. Maya stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past, each one a reminder of how far she'd fallen from the woman she thought she was just hours ago. She looked so small leaving the hospital, Maya whispered, her breath fogging the glass. I keep seeing her face when she walked away. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She's stronger than she looks. She's had to be. His voice carried 20 years of complicated emotion, love, resentment, guilt, hope. But Maya, what you said about the money, about her motives, I know. The words came out strangled. God, David, I know. I can't take it back, can I? I can't undo standing there in front of your dying father and accusing your mother of being a gold digger. They pulled into their driveway, but neither moved to get out. The house that had felt like their sanctuary just that morning now seemed like a monument to their naivety. Two people who thought love was enough, who believed they could build something beautiful without examining the foundation. Tell me about the day she left, Maya said suddenly. Not the version you told me when we were dating. The real version. David killed the engine, and the sudden quiet felt deafening. Maya, please, I need to understand. I need to know who I really hurt today. He was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. She was making pancakes. It was a Saturday morning, and Dad was already drinking even though it wasn't even 9 o'clock. He'd lost another job and the bills were piling up, and he was taking it out on both of us. Maya turned to face him, seeing the 17-year-old boy he'd been flickering across his features. She burned the first batch because she was trying to dodge one of his rants, and he just exploded, started screaming about waste, about how everything she touched turned to shit, about how we'd be better off without her. David's voice cracked. God, Maya, I was so angry at both of them. Angry at him for being a drunk, angry at her for staying, angry at myself for being trapped in the middle of it. What did you do? When she turned to me, when she looked at me with these desperate eyes like she was begging me to defend her, I said nothing, worse than nothing. I told her maybe Dad was right, maybe we would be better off without her. The confession hung between them, like a physical presence. Maya felt her heart break for all of them, for the scared boy, the desperate woman, the broken man whose pain had poisoned everything he touched. She left that afternoon, David continued, packed one suitcase and walked out, didn't even take her wedding ring, just left it on the kitchen counter next to a note saying she was sorry for failing us. David, I told myself for years that she abandoned us. It was easier than admitting I'd helped drive her away, easier than acknowledging that maybe she left because staying was killing her, and neither Dad nor I gave her a reason to keep trying. Maya reached across the console and took his hand. You were 17. You were a kid caught in an impossible situation. So were you today. His eyes met hers. Caught in an impossible situation, trying to protect something you love. That's different. I'm an adult. I should have what? Been perfect, should have instinctively known how to navigate a family dynamic that took me 20 years to understand. David squeezed her hand. Maya, what you did was wrong, but it came from love, not cruelty. That matters. Maya felt tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. I called your mother a vulture, David. I accused her of waiting for your father to die so she could profit from it. What if those are the last words she ever hears from our family? Then we make sure they're not. How? She won't take our calls. She probably never wants to see either of us again. David was quiet for a moment, staring at their joined hands. There's one place she might go, somewhere she used to take me when I was little, when things got bad at home. It's a long shot, but where? There's a diner about an hour north of here. Open all night, overlooks the lake. She used to say it was the only place in the world where she could think clearly. He looked up at Maya. She might be there, And if she is, if we can find her, what if she doesn't want to listen? What if we've already lost her? David started the car again, his jaw set with determination Maya recognized. The same look he'd had when he'd proposed, when he'd fought for the promotion that let them buy their house, when he'd decided their love was worth fighting for. Then we keep trying until she knows we're not giving up on her. Not this time. The hospital waiting room felt smaller with each passing hour. Sarah sat rigidly in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, David paced the narrow strip of floor between the chairs and the window, his dress shirt wrinkled and his tie hanging loose around his neck. Neither had spoken since the nurse last updated them an hour ago. Margaret was stable but hadn't regained consciousness since collapsing in their living room. The word stress-induced cardiac episode echoed in Sarah's mind like a persistent drumbeat of guilt. She could have died. David's voice cut through the silence, raw and accusatory. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked dangerously close to hatred. Sarah's throat constricted. "David, She could have died, and the last thing she would have remembered was you calling her a pathetic old woman who destroyed her own family." His voice cracked on the last words. The weight of what she'd said crashed over her again, each cruel syllable she'd hurled at Margaret, playing back in vivid detail. She'd been so consumed with protecting what she thought was hers that she'd become the very thing she'd accused Margaret of being: destructive. "I know what I did was wrong," Sarah whispered. "I know I can't take it back. But David, I thought—" "You thought what? That my mother was some kind of con artist?" David laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea what she's been through? What we've all been through?" Sarah looked up at him, seeing a stranger in her husband's familiar features. "Then tell me, because I've been trying to understand for months why you won't talk about your family, why you change the subject every time I ask about your childhood. I've been living with a ghost I didn't even know existed." David slumped into the chair beside her, suddenly looking decades older. "You want to know? Fine." His voice was hollow. "My father was an alcoholic, not the kind who just had too many beers after work, the kind who disappeared for days, who spent grocery money on whiskey, who made my mother's life hell for 15 years. Sarah felt her breath catch, but she remained silent, afraid that any sound might stop him from continuing. "My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed. She made excuses for him, covered for him, protected me from the worst of it. And I resented her for it." David's hands clenched into fists. "I was 17 and thought I knew everything. I thought she was weak for staying, weak for not fighting back. So when she finally asked for my help, when she finally decided to leave him, I told her she'd made her bed and she could lie in it." The machines beeping in nearby rooms seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. "I left for college and didn't look back, didn't return her calls, didn't come home for holidays. I told myself I was making a clean start, but really I was just a coward who abandoned the one person who'd sacrificed everything for me." David's voice broke. "She divorced him eventually, had to do it all alone while I was playing the successful college student who'd risen above his trashy family." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "David." She never stopped trying to reach out. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, letters telling me about her new job, her little apartment. I threw them all away. And then when you and I got serious, when we started planning the wedding, she wrote and said she understood if I didn't want her there, but that she loved me and was proud of the man I'd become. His laugh was bitter, proud of the son who'd abandoned her when she needed him most. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I'd built this narrative where I was the victim who'd overcome his circumstances, and admitting the truth meant admitting I was just another selfish bastard who'd failed the person who loved him most." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "And because I was afraid that if you knew what kind of person I really was, you'd leave." Sarah reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "But you know what the worst part is?" David stood up again, his voice rising. "I was finally ready. After watching you with your family, seeing how you fight for the people you love even when they drive you crazy, I was finally ready to call her, to apologize, to try to build something real. You still can, Sarah said desperately. Can I? Because the woman I love just destroyed any chance of that happening. She's lying in there broken and hurt, and it's not just my fault anymore, it's yours too. The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier, and Sarah realized that saving her marriage might require losing it first. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Elena carefully arranged fresh flowers in a vase, her movements deliberate and purposeful. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating confrontation, and the house still felt fragile, like a glass ornament that had been cracked and hastily glued back together. Marcus emerged from the hallway, his hair still damp from the shower, and paused when he saw her. These small moments of domestic normalcy still caught them both off guard, as if they were learning to be married all over again. "Coffee's ready," she said softly, not quite meeting his eyes. "Thank you." He poured himself a cup, the silence stretching between them, not hostile anymore, but cautious, like two people walking on ice that might crack at any moment. The doorbell rang, and they both froze. Elena's hand tightened around her coffee mug as memories of that terrible afternoon came flooding back. Marcus noticed her reaction and gently touched her shoulder. "I'll get it," he said. But Elena was already moving toward the door. "No, I will." She opened it to find Margaret standing on their doorstep, looking as nervous as Elena felt. The older woman held a small wrapped package in her hands, her fingers worrying at the ribbon. "Margaret," Elena breathed, stepping back to let her in. "Please come in." Marcus appeared behind Elena, and for a moment the three of them stood in an awkward triangle of uncertainty. Margaret looked between them, searching their faces. "I brought something," Margaret said finally, extending the package toward Elena. I hoped you might want to see it." Elena accepted the gift with trembling hands and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a photo album, its cover worn soft with age. She opened it to the first page and gasped. There was Marcus as a little boy, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on Margaret's lap while she read him a story. "I've been carrying this with me," Margaret said quietly, "for 20 years. Every time I moved, every time I started over, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Elena turned the pages slowly, watching Marcus grow up in snapshots. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations to the beach. In every photo, Margaret's love for her son was unmistakable, radiating from her smile, evident in the way she held him close. "I remember this one," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. He pointed to a picture of himself at maybe 8 years old, standing proudly beside a lopsided birthday cake. "You let me help frost it, and I got more icing on the counter than on the cake." Margaret laughed, a sound that was half joy, half sob. "You were so determined to do it yourself. Your father was furious about the mess, but you were so proud." They moved to the living room, the photo album spread across the coffee table like a bridge between past and present. Elena found herself studying Margaret's face in the pictures, seeing not the gold digger she had imagined, but a young mother navigating the same hopes and fears that Elena herself might face someday. "I want you to know," Elena said suddenly, "what I said to you that day, it came from fear, not truth. I was terrified of losing Marcus, and I lashed out at you instead of facing my own insecurities." Margaret reached across the table and covered Elena's hand with her own. "Fear makes us all say things we don't mean. I understand that better than most." Marcus cleared his throat, his jaw working as he struggled with words that had been buried for 2 decades. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When you left, was it really about the money? About Dad's threats?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. "Your father gave me an ultimatum. He said if I didn't sign away my rights to any future claim on his assets, he would make sure I never saw you again. He had lawyers, influence, money to fight me in court for years. I was working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. But you could have fought. Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. I could have, Margaret agreed. But at what cost to you? You would have been caught in the middle of a war between your parents. I thought if I disappeared, you could have a stable life. I thought I was protecting you. Elena watched as understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes, followed quickly by grief for all the lost years, all the missed moments that could never be recovered. I was wrong, Margaret continued. I was a coward, and I robbed us both of 20 years we can't get back, but I'm here now if you'll have me. Marcus stood abruptly and crossed to his mother, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched them hold each other, feeling the broken pieces of their family finally beginning to heal. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light through the windows and illuminating the three of them, imperfect, wounded, but finally, tentatively, whole.